The most painful mistakes are not the ones you make in confusion. They are the ones you make with total confidence, in broad daylight, fully convinced that you are doing the right thing. That is the kind of mistake I made. And I am sitting here today, in this chair that used to belong in my own home, to tell you exactly what it cost me. Not to shame myself. Not because I enjoy revisiting it. But because I am old enough now to know that a warning spoken honestly is worth more than a lesson learned in silence. My name is Omporo. I grew up in a small house where money was not a subject for casual conversation, but it was always present in the background, the way weather is always present even when you are indoors. My mother communicated the value of things not through lectures but through repetition. Every time something broke before its time, every time something cost more than expected, she would name the number clearly and without drama. Not as a complaint. As information. As her way of teaching us that resources are finite and that finite things deserve to be treated with care. My father was a carpenter who said very little but demonstrated everything. His lesson, delivered through 40 years of consistent behavior rather than a single speech, was simple. What you earn, you protect. Because nobody is coming to replace what you waste. Those two lessons went into me when I was very young and they never came out. For better and for worse, they never came out. I arrived in this city at 19 with very little and a great deal of determination, the way young people used to arrive in cities when there was no other option. I met my husband Leandro not long after. He was a few years older, a man of very few words and very consistent actions, the kind of person who simply did the necessary thing without needing to be asked or thanked. We understood each other immediately on the things that mattered most. We had both come from very little. We both wanted to build something solid without leaning on anyone else to help us do it. That shared understanding was the foundation of everything we built together. I worked in a food processing factory for several years. Then for more than 2 decades in a school, cleaning and maintaining the building. These are not the kinds of jobs that come up in polite conversation at dinner parties. But I did them completely, with everything I had, and through them I contributed to a household where nothing essential was ever missing and something small was always left over at the end of each month. That something small, Leandro and I saved without touching it except in genuine emergencies. We never spoke about it very much. There was no grand strategy or formal agreement. We simply shared the same instinct about preserving what we had, and over the years and the decades that instinct built something real underneath us. 3 children. My eldest daughter, full of feeling and intensity, the kind of person who cried at films and laughed until the room shook and experienced everything at a volume that sometimes exhausted me and sometimes seemed like the most vivid thing in the world. My middle son, closed and careful like his father, a keeper of interior things. And my youngest, who arrived when I thought there would be no more children, who looked at me from his very first day with an expression that completely undid me. I raised them with what I knew, which was not always the most modern approach or the one the books recommended, but it was genuine and it was mine and it was the best I had to give. Leandro died 8 years ago. A Tuesday morning during breakfast, 43 years into the marriage, without warning or preparation of any kind. Which is the most unjust way to lose someone, because it leaves you no time to say the things you had been meaning to say for years. That year was very dark. But I came through it, because I had no other real option and because somewhere underneath all the grief I was still the woman my mother had raised, and that woman gets up even when she does not feel like it. When I came through the other side, I was alone but I was whole. I had my pension. I had the savings Leandro and I had accumulated carefully across 4 decades. I had the flat, paid in full, in a neighborhood that had increased significantly in value over the years. I was not wealthy. I was never wealthy, not for a single day of my life. But I was free. I could look at my own situation and make genuine choices without needing permission or assistance from anyone. For a woman of my generation, that freedom was not a small or ordinary thing. I had watched too many friends become invisible after they were widowed, suddenly dependent on their children for the most basic decisions, stripped of the quiet dignity that comes from managing your own affairs. I was not in that position. I had worked for decades specifically so that I would not be in that position. And I felt a private pride about it that I never said aloud, because women of my era were not in the habit of announcing their achievements. But I felt it. And then I gave it all away. The idea came to me on an ordinary evening watching the news. A segment about inheritance taxes, about the bureaucratic and financial burden that falls on children when parents die, about the paperwork and the waiting and the money that disappears into administrative processes while families are still trying to grieve. And without anyone suggesting it, without any outside influence at all, a thought appeared in my mind that felt, at the time, like pure practical wisdom. Why should I wait? The money is going to them anyway. My time is getting shorter. I could see them benefit from it now, while I am still here to share in whatever happiness it brings. What is the point of making them wait for something that was always meant for them? I want to pause here and look at that thought carefully, because it is worth examining. At the time it felt clean and logical and generous. Looking back, I can see that it was none of those things, or rather that it was all of those things on the surface and something quite different underneath. The mind, when it wants to convince itself of something, is extraordinarily resourceful at finding supporting arguments. And my mind spent the following days quietly assembling a very persuasive case. My eldest with her mortgage pressing down on her. My middle son with years of wanting to start his own business and never quite having enough to begin. My youngest, who never asked for anything, precisely because he knew I would worry, which meant I was certain he was carrying things silently that I could not see. I had what I had. They needed it now, not in 15 years. And I told myself, with the easy certainty of someone who does not yet understand what certainty costs, that I did not have much time left. That phrase, I do not have much time left, spoken so lightly, so casually, as though the duration of a human life was something that could be estimated with reasonable accuracy. As though death had the courtesy to arrive on a schedule that allowed for sensible financial planning. That comfortable assumption was where everything went wrong, though I could not see it at the time. I gathered my children for a Sunday lunch. The whole family around the table the way it used to be when they were young, and the flat felt small and full and nobody wanted to leave when the meal was done. Afterwards, with coffee in our hands, I told them what I had decided. I was going to divide my savings equally between the three of them. The flat I would put in my eldest daughter's name because she lived closest and it made practical sense for her to be the one to manage it. There was a silence after I finished speaking, one of those silences whose quality is impossible to read while it lasts. Then my daughter began to cry and said it was too much and I did not need to do this. My middle son said I should think about it more carefully. My youngest, after a long pause, asked whether I was certain. I was certain. Or I believed I was, which from the inside feels exactly the same. They accepted because when a mother says something with that quality of absolute conviction, disagreement feels disrespectful. I signed the documents. I divided the savings. I transferred the flat. I kept my pension, which is what the state decides to pay you each month for 40 years of uninterrupted work. When it is a supplement to other resources, a pension feels like enough. When it becomes the only thing you have, you discover very quickly how small it actually is. For several months I felt like a woman who had done something wise. I could see my daughter less tense, the weight of her mortgage somewhat eased. I could see my middle son energized by the business he was finally able to start. I could see my youngest with a settled quality he had not had before. I told myself, quietly, that I had done the right thing at the right time. Then my knee finally ran out of patience. I had been managing the pain for years with the combination of anti-inflammatory medication and stubborn refusal to make a fuss about something that had not yet stopped me from functioning. But there comes a point where a doctor looks at you and says plainly that management is no longer an option, that the damage has progressed beyond what medication can address, and that surgery is the only path forward if you want to continue walking with any real independence. The operation itself was covered. But what followed was not fully covered. Rehabilitation. Specific equipment. The daily practical costs of being a woman living alone whose body is not yet responsive to her will again. All of that carries a price that my pension, the only thing I had left, could not meet. I called my daughter. She came. She was present before the operation and stayed to help in the first difficult days, and I want to be precise about that because she deserves the credit. But when I raised the financial side of the recovery, she told me gently that this particular moment was not possible. A renovation had left them stretched. Perhaps in a few months. I called my middle son. The business had been harder to establish than expected. He was sorry. My youngest sent what he could, not a significant amount but given with real warmth, and he visited several times. Each time he handed me something, I thanked him with complete sincerity. And while I thanked him, something in my chest turned over quietly, because the money he was returning to me had been mine. All of it had been mine less than a year before. I was thanking my son for giving me back a fraction of what I had given him with such confidence and such certainty and such love. That was the first true crack. Not the physical pain, which was real but temporary. The crack was the new feeling of having to ask. Of picking up the telephone already knowing you need something and having to wait and manage whatever comes back on the other end. Of measuring your own need against someone else's capacity and circumstance. Of feeling, for the first time in your adult life, like a problem someone else has to solve. I had spent my entire adult life on the other side of that equation. I had always been the one who solved things. The movement from one side of that line to the other happens without announcement, and you only recognize you have crossed it when you look back and cannot find the way to return. The situation with the flat came later and completed the picture in a way I was not prepared for. My daughter's marriage ran into serious difficulties. I will not go into the details because they belong to her and not to me. But the legal complications that followed reached the property I had transferred with such serenity, and a solicitor explained to me in careful technical language that I no longer had any claim on it. What I had signed, I had signed. The consequences were what they were regardless of intention, regardless of who bore responsibility, regardless of the fact that nobody had planned any of it this way. I was left with my pension and very little else. A woman who lives here, sharp-tongued and 92 years old, told me one afternoon something that I did not want to hear but that I have been unable to dismiss since she said it. She told me I had loved my children too well to have taught them properly. That by spending their entire childhoods as a mother who needed nothing, who resolved everything, who never let them see the person behind the capability, I had raised adults who simply did not know how to care for a mother. Not because they were careless or ungrateful. Because I had never given them any real opportunity to practice. They had grown up with the impression that their mother was a force rather than a person. And when I needed to be a person, they did not quite know what to do with that. I sat with that for a long time. I am still sitting with it. There is something that my generation of women was taught so thoroughly that it went all the way down, past thought, past decision, into the very base of how we understood ourselves. We were taught that the highest form of love was depletion. That a good mother was one who gave until the giving was the whole of her. That keeping anything for yourself carried a faint but unmistakable flavor of selfishness, of smallness, of not quite meeting the standard that was expected. With those ideas living so deep inside us, we arrived at a certain age and made decisions that looked like generosity from the outside and were genuinely, partly, rooted in love. But underneath the love, if we are honest, there was fear. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear that our children's affection was conditional on our usefulness. Fear of arriving at a day when nobody needed us anymore and having nothing left with which to hold their attention. I gave what I had out of love, yes. But I also gave it out of that fear. And the result was the precise opposite of what I was trying to secure. I lost my own resources and with them the only independence that actually matters, which is not the independence of doing things alone but the independence of being able to choose. To say no when no is the right answer. To ask for help when you need it without the asking itself costing you something you cannot afford to lose. Nobody told me that was what I was gambling. Or perhaps someone did, and I did not listen, because the part of the decision that made me feel generous and brave was so much more comfortable to focus on. This morning I sat with my coffee looking out at the garden here. There is a pine tree that moves in a particular way when the wind comes through, slow and complete, as though the whole tree is breathing rather than just the branches. I watched it for a long time without thinking about anything specific. And then I did think, about Leandro and what he would have made of all this, about my children and how much I love them and how complicated it is to love people well when you do not yet understand what loving well actually requires. I am going to say what nobody said to me. Growing old has a price. A real, concrete, unavoidable price that is much higher than it appears from a comfortable distance. Operations. Medications that public health systems do not fully cover. Rehabilitation. The daily costs of care when your body begins to need assistance with things it used to do without thinking. All of that must be paid by someone. And if you cannot pay it yourself, you pay it in something else. You pay it in the currency of your own dignity. Keep what you have. Not because you do not love your children. You do. Not because you will never help them. You will, and it is right that you do. Keep it because a woman with her own resources is a woman who can choose. Who helps from a position of genuine security rather than from the edge of anxiety. Who can ask for what she needs without the asking stripping something fundamental from how she sees herself each morning. Who does not have to thank her child for returning a small piece of what she once handed over with both hands and a full heart. And if someone you love, a mother, an aunt, a friend of many years, begins talking about simplifying, about transferring things early, about not wanting to be a burden when the time comes, do not just nod and agree. Sit with her first. Ask what she has planned for the years ahead. Ask whether she has seriously considered what her own care might cost in 5 years, in 10. Ask, gently and genuinely, whether she is certain this is wisdom or whether it might be something else in wisdom's clothing. You will not be taking anything from her by asking those questions. You will be protecting her from a particular kind of loneliness that comes from needing things and having nothing left with which to meet that need. My children love me. That has not changed. My daughter comes every week. My middle son calls regularly and always brings something small when he visits, something he has remembered I like. My youngest is the most present of the 3, the one who notices things without being asked, who appeared one Sunday with a book I had mentioned in passing the week before and had not expected him to remember. They are not bad children. They are real children with full lives and their own pressures and the natural limitations that come with being human. I love them with everything I have. And love, as I have learned at considerable cost, is real and necessary and not sufficient on its own. Love does not pay for rehabilitation. Love does not cover the gap between what the state provides and what your body actually requires. Love does not give back the independence you signed away on a Sunday afternoon believing you were being wise. Love is essential and it is not enough, and both of those things are true simultaneously. Learning that late is painful. But I did learn it. And if what I have said here today reaches someone who still has time to make a different choice, then it was worth sitting in this chair and saying it plainly. That is all I have. And I mean that more literally than I would like.